on where is that? You. Okay, Stevie, we're good to go.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. And hi, everyone. My name's Stevie Wilson. I'm a Power BI and Power Platform developer with AndWorks alongside of Rachel. And this is a presentation I've given and kind of refined over the years as things change in the platform and as we just learn new things. But the big story here is, how do we make the deployment pipeline tool functionality in Power BI and in Power Platform? How do we make these two separate tools sync up when you have a use case where you're embedding your Power BI content into your Canvas or your model-driven apps? So that's what we're going to be going through today. It's going to be very demo heavy, just as a heads up, but I'm going to provide a lot of links and things. So feel free to follow along, interrupt me at any point. Rachel will kind of let me know if there's any questions. But basically, quick agenda, we're just going to go through, if you're new to deployment pipelines, I'll go over just a couple of key concepts that are going to help you make sense of what's going on here. We'll do a brief introduction into just kind of what you need to know to follow along. And then most of this is going to be two demos. One is how to sync up these deployment pipelines when you have embedded your dashboard object into an MDA. And then second one is going to be how to do the same exact thing of syncing up those pipelines when you're using that Power BI tile control in your Canvas app. So just a quick kind of overview to deployment pipelines. And I'll say up front right now that in order to do everything that I'm showing in this presentation, you will need the kind of premium level of licensing for Power Platform and Power BI. The deployment pipelines are premium features. So if you're interested in this, just make sure you've got the appropriate licensing. But deployment pipelines in a general sense, this is a method for managing that process of where you're building and then you're testing and then you're releasing either your Power BI content, your Power Platform content, that kind of like cyclical process where you have a life cycle of all of these solutions that you're building. You roll them out, people want enhancements, you need to do some bug testing, etc. And so the standard kind of stages of this would be development, test, and production. So when we talk about our stages, I'm going to use that kind of standard. But just so you know, too, you can tailor that to have as many stages as you would like. If you have a pre-prod or additional testing stages, the deployment pipelines functionality in BI and in Power Platform supports a lot of flexibility. But we're going to use this idea of having separate stages for development, test, and production. So that would be workspaces in Power BI or environments in Power Platform, so that you can do all of your development and testing work without affecting those things that you have live in production. And the deployment pipelines are great. There's a couple of key concepts that you're going to want to understand just for this demonstration, and I'll provide some links to resources if you'd like to get set up a little bit more information with the pipelines. But these two concepts here are related, and they are kind of going to be key if we're going through this presentation and you're wondering why we're doing things the way we're doing. It's because of this feature of pipelines, which is that when you're deploying whatever you have from dev to test to prod through these stages, the objects that you've created, so your Canvas apps, MDAs, Power Automate flows, semantic models, reports, all those objects that you've made, those are going to get copied from stage to stage just as they are. But for your data source, if you're using Dataverse, which we will in this demo, the table structure itself is going to get copied from stage to stage, but the actual data that you've populated is not. So the rows are not coming through from dev to test to prod, but the field names, if you created forms, views, all the metadata or the structure of that table, that structure is considered an object that gets copied. But like when you create, test records, you have your testers testing, you wouldn't want them to be pushing their test data into your production environment. So just kind of remember as we go through this, the reason why we have to do a lot of the configuration we do when you want to sync up your Power BI embedded in your MDA or embedded in your Canvas app is because we need to have a way of making sure that it's pointed at the correct, not only the correct environment or the correct source, but also pulling in the correct data. So just a couple of QR codes here, and I'll pull these up at the end too in case you've missed them. But if you are new to Power Platform pipelines and you'd like to get started or just get some more information, this will take you to a great blog written by one of my coworkers. He's got a ton of awesome content here about the Power Platform, so it's a great resource. And Same thing if you would like to get started with Power BI pipelines. This is a link to my blog where it's going to give you an overview, all the requirements, any limitations for getting started with Power BI pipelines. Because coming into this demo, we're not really focused on that setup. We're coming in assuming that you have these pipelines set up, and we're going to talk about some advanced use cases within them. And then last QR code. So there's going to be a lot of content here. My demonstration is very step-by-step in a lot of different tools. So if you at any point need to revisit this, in addition to this recording, this will also take you to a link on my blog where I've written up all the steps here and provided some other information about troubleshooting and some additional things to consider or to look out for. And again, I'll put all these QR codes up on the screen at the end as well. So jumping right into the demonstration, for both of these cases where we're embedding the Power BI into the Canvas app and the MDA, we're kind of coming at this from the same basic structure where we have an existing solution, which I'm going to run through really quickly. And we are now requesting to make some modifications to actually sync up the pipeline and the Power BI report as you move through the app in its various stages. So what we've been asked to do is modify an existing solution that was built for the IT team. We've built them a solution to receive and track their help desk tickets. So they have their Canvas app where users can submit tickets. That data gets saved to Dataverse. And then the help desk team has an MDA, which we're going to work in our first demo. And so whenever they're in the MDA and they're updating these tickets, this is in a deployment pipeline right now, this solution. So the live version where the IT team is working, this is going to connect to their Dataverse table that sits in their production environment. And then separately, they have a Power BI report that they've got published out in Power BI service. And so although this, they have a deployment pipeline set up for their BI report, but what they've got right now is at every stage of their Power BI pipeline, the data source is just hard coded to always be pointing at the Dataverse table that's in the production environment. So the IT team has asked us, they don't want to have two different URLs to have to go to the app and the BI. They want this BI embedded within their model-driven app. And that whenever it's in the various stages, like when your MDA is in development, then the BI report should reflect the development data, same with tests and same with prod. So we're going to focus on how to get all of this synced up and to be completely automated so that anytime that you're doing your deployments through your pipelines, these are all synced up and the embedded dashboard is going to be completely in sync with no sort of, it doesn't require any input or anything to change from the user because we'll set it up once and then this just is sort of self-maintaining. So there's a bunch of different steps we're going to go through. We have to do some configuration first in the Power BI file. So we're going to make the data source string connection dynamic so that instead of always saying, give me the Dataverse table that's in your production environment, as it moves through the pipeline, we want to feed it the URL to point to your Dataverse table in dev, test, or prod environments. So we're going to download our PBIX file from the dev environment, and we're going to create what's called a data source parameter, which is where we can feed the string for the correct environment for our Power Platform for the Dataverse table. So to create this parameter, you're going to go up in your ribbon to transform data to open up Power Query. And then again, from the Home tab, you're going to go into Manage Parameters, and you'll select New Parameter. And this is going to give you a window that's going to walk you through the different details for this parameter. And so basically we're just creating, this is very similar in concept to like an environment variable in Power Platform where it's going to just hold the value of the environment that you want to pull the Dataverse table from. So I'm going to give this a name, call it environment URL, make sure the type is required and the type is text, and then you'll want to feed it a list of values. And then in this list of values, you're going to have, for me, we have the dev, test, and prod stages. So we're going to pull the environment URLs for each of those Power Platform environments. Next slide, I'll show you how to find that if you're new to that. But you're going to just add those in as your list of values. And then the final step here, down at the bottom, is you're going to fill out both the default and the current value. And so the default value, this you put in here in case for some reason Power BI doesn't know what you're expecting for this environment URL. If something's not configured correctly, then it's going to default. And I normally choose dev for this, but you can choose any of your list of values to kind of just be the fallback value. And then for the current value, we'll also want to set it to our current the value for the development environment. So once you've got that set up, click OK. Just really quickly, if you need to find your environment URL within Power Platform, you'll go there in your browser, go to your settings, go to your admin center link, and then within the admin center, you'll just go into your environment, and you'll repeat this process 3 times, but you'll find the dev environment. And then right on the first page, right at the top, is your environment URL. So you'll just want to grab that and feed that into the list of values on the previous page so that you have the options for your different environments. And now once you load that parameter in, you'll see under your queries, it's going to give you a new query that represents that parameter. And then in your current value, you can see you've got this drop down here now. So I'll show you in a second how once we finish this out, you'll be able to actually toggle between. So if at any point you want to switch over and see how your dashboard looks when connected to production data just within the PBIX file, you can do that from right here. Once you click close and apply, because this has been parameterized, it's now going to check what is expected to load once it pulls that parameter in. But the final step here now is to switch the data source to the parameter. So you can see over here, this top query, the test help desk request, that is our connection to our Dataverse table, which as it is right now is just set to always be connected to production. So what we're going to want to do here is just swap out, instead of having it always be connected to prod, we're going to reference our environment URL parameter so that it can be dynamic. And then this is going to be a short video. In the beginning, first, what I'm going to do is show you how to switch the current value. We're going to switch to test so that later on when we load this in, you'll actually see that it's going to switch out to some different data. So this is just me switching over to the test and the current value, and then we'll go into that query, and you're going to go over to your applied steps, and you're going to want to double click on the source. That's going to open this dialog box, and I'm going to pause for a second so we can get a good look at it. So this is when you use the standard Dataverse connector. Right now, you can see it's just been hard-coded for my development environment, but you can change this drop down here. Instead of it being a text value, it'll accept a parameter. So you'll change the type to parameter, and now it's going to pull up any parameters you've created. And now that's all you have to do. You'll click OK, and now the source is always going to pull your current value for your parameter. And so now you can see I've clicked and I've loaded that in. This was dev, and now we're going to go to test. So as soon as this loads in, you'll see that the data actually switches, because now we're pointing to the Dataverse table in a different environment, which has a different set of records in there. So now we switched, we've got different data coming from the test environment. And that is all you need to do in your Power BI file to get this set up. There's still a few things we have to set up in service, but at this point you can publish your Power BI file up to that dev workspace, and just make sure that you've set that current value. If you've toggled between the environments, just make sure it's set back to dev when you publish it up. And then once we're up in service, we can set up rules for, as you go through your deployment pipeline into each workspace, what should the value of that parameter be? So this is the Power BI deployment pipeline. Just a quick kind of overview here. You've got the name of the pipeline. Development, test, and production are our stages. So we'll set the parameter values and the parameter rules on the stage. Stages are aligned with workspaces. So you can see we've got our workspace with all of our content in here. And then also just one other thing to note, before you can set up these parameter rules, your semantic model actually has to exist in that workspace. So if you're doing this from scratch with a new project, just make sure that you've published it up to dev and deployed it the whole way through so that you can go in and actually set up the parameter rules on an existing dashboard. And so the way you're going to set up these rules is in the test environment. We're going to go over to this little lightning bolt, and that is going to open up the deployment rules interface. This is why you needed to make sure the semantic model already exists, because you'll select which model you set the rule up on. And then you'll get the option to add a rule once you've selected. And then we're going to set up, the language is a little bit confusing with from and to, but what this means is the from is select your environment URL or the parameter that we created. And then the to is going to be what the value of that parameter should be when it hits this, this stage of the pipeline. And so I know when we were in the Power BI file, we pasted in our environment URLs as that list of values. Unfortunately, that doesn't actually translate up into service. And so We do have the option for development here whenever you come to set this up. That's just because that's what the value of the parameter is in dev. So when we deployed it, it recognized that, but it didn't pull in our list. So you do actually have to click on other, and then you'll get a second pop-up, and you'll actually just have to paste the URL for the test environment into there. But once you get that set up and click save, now you're all set. And so now when you deploy to the test environment, it's going to respect that parameter rule and connect to the dataverse table in the test environment. And then this is the same thing in production. It's just a video so you can see it in a little bit more zoomed out format. So we go to production, we go into our lightning bolt, we select our semantic model, parameter rules, and add a rule, and then environment URL. Now I included this because this interface for me at least is still pretty buggy, and I could not get a video where it wasn't buggy, but it kind of just, you click around and it does reset itself. But we're going to just put in, so we've selected other and dropped in the URL for production, and then click save, close out of there. And now you've set up your rules for each of your stages. Last thing you have to do before this is actually fully functional is you just need to deploy everything through the pipeline again, because these parameter rules are going to be respected on a deployment. So from dev, you'll just push through to test and to production. And then also you'll want to make sure that you refresh the semantic model in each of the workspaces. Once that's all finished, then you are going to be good to go. And in the future, any future deployments are always going to check for and respect the rules that you've set up here. And so that's all you have to do for Power BI. So now what we've got is this Power BI pipeline where, depending on which workspace you're in, you are going to be pulling from the data from the corresponding Dataverse table in Dev Test or Prod. So now we're going to go into the model-driven app. And the first thing we need to do here is we actually need to get the Power BI embedded into the MDA. So just a quick couple steps here to show how to do that if you've not done that before. Now we are up in Power Platform. We're in the solution in our development environment. And real simple, we're just going to go to New, and then down to Dashboard, and then down to Power BI Embedded. And that's going to create this control for us. Now this walks you through setting this up. So you're going to get this first dialog box here where you'll want to give your dashboard object a name. With MDAs, we can do this with a Power BI report or a dashboard. When we get to the Canvas apps, it has to be a dashboard type, but we'll talk more about that when we get to it. But for the MDA, you can do this with either type. And then you'll want to make sure that you check on use environment variable. And this is because, especially for our use case, we're using parameters in Power BI and environment variables in Power Platform to do the same thing, to kind of make that connection and dynamic so that those pipelines are synced up depending on where we are. So when you create this dashboard object, you want to say, rather than hard coding what this dashboard should be and that it should always be the same thing, we want to be able to have some dynamic logic about what exactly is being pulled in depending on which environment in Power Platform that we're in. So make sure that's checked, and then go down to the drop down for the environment variable, and you'll want to click on the option where we're going to create a new one for this dashboard's connection reference or connection source. So once you click on new, you're going to get a second dialog box pop up. This is where we're going to create our environment variable. And so you can see it's kind of similar, especially down here, to what we did with the parameter in Power BI. So give it a name. Just make sure you remember kind of what name you gave it, because we're going to use that a little bit later in the video. And then for the data type, it'll be JSON. And then we get down, this looks familiar, we've got the default and the current value again. So just like it was in Power BI, it's the same concept. Default is if something goes wrong and it doesn't know what value to use for this environment variable, I'm going to default it to going to the demo development workspace in Power BI and picking the report. And then because right now in Power Platform, we're working in the dev environment, I also want the current value of the environment variable to be pulling the report from the demo development workspace in Power BI. So set all that up, click save, and in the backend, Power BI or Power Platform is going to generate an environment variable that is written in JSON, which we're going to look at a little bit later. And it just contains all of this information about the exact Power BI report that should be pulled in whenever you're viewing the dashboard inside the MDA. Oh, forgot these were on here, but this just kind of walks through everything that I said of how to fill out these sections. So now that we've set all that up, now we just need to get the dashboard actually brought into the model-driven app so that the users can navigate to it. So really quickly here, just a video of how to get that actually in there, because you can see we're in the development environment, we're in our solution. You can see now that we've got a dashboard object and we've got an environment variable added to the solution. So we just need to pull that into the app. So go into your apps and open up your model-driven app. And then you're just going to add that dashboard object as a new page. So up along the top, you'll click new, type will be dashboard, and then you'll want to switch the top section to be a Power BI dashboard. That'll pull in all your Power BI dashboards from your environment. Keep show and navigation checked so you get that link on the left, and then add, and then you're all set. You do need to publish it and before you can actually see it, but at this point, even though it looks like in the video it's not in there, it is. You just need to publish it, and then you've got your dashboard inside your MDA. And then the next step is just to deploy through the pipeline. So it sounds like we're close to the end, but there's one kind of big thing we still need to do. But essentially all of the configuration we need to do is all set. So you're going to publish your model-driven app, and then you're going to go into your Power Platform pipeline, and you're going to trigger that deployment to test. And so we're in our Power Platform pipeline. We've kicked that off. What you're going to get to when you go in the Power Platform pipeline is this stage here where it's going to ask you for the value of any environment variables in your target environment. So in tests for this example. And so we've got the one environment variable that we've created for the dashboard. And you can start to see here that there's some JSON in here. So in the development environment, this has generated a reference to the Power BI report that's in the demo dev workspace. We're going to need to change this just on this first deployment here. Once we set this up, this time you won't have to mess with this ever again. But we need to actually update this environment variable's value to point to the dashboard that lives in the Power BI test workspace. And so what I've done is you just copy all of that out from the dev value, and it's JSON that has two main components, and it's really just telling you the exact workspace and then the exact report to connect to. So we've got two sections here. You kind of can see you've got the group and the component. The group, that just refers to, it's another word for a Power BI workspace. And so you can see it's got two pieces there. You've got the ID and the name. And so the ID is going to come from a URL that we can go grab. So what you'll want to do is you're going to open your, since we're generating the environment variable for test, we're going to go into Power BI, into our workspace, into the test workspace. We're going to open this report, and we're just going to copy the URL. And this is going to have all of this ID information that we need. So I went and did that. Here is my whole long URL that would open up directly the workspace, the report that's in the test workspace. And so you can see app.powerbi.com/groups. So when you're looking for the group ID, it is groups/ and then there is your group ID up to the next /. So you'll just grab that out, paste that in there. The second piece, the name, that's just the display name of your workspace. You can just grab that right off of service. And then the second portion here is component, and that's going to refer to the specific object, either the report or the dashboard that you're pulling in. And again, this information is all up in between the workspace and between this URL. You can get all this information. So for the ID, if we go back to our URL after the reports, after the string for the groups, then you've got /reports, and then you've got the string for your specific report. So you just grab that and drop it in. You can disregard everything after that. We don't make use of any of the rest of this in the URL. The name is just the display name of the report. And then the type is going to either be report or dashboard, depending on the type that it is in service. And then the only, I guess this is kind of, it's not even really complicated, but this I think is the only piece that could trip you up. And we'll talk in the next slide about some troubleshooting tips for this. But the embed URL is pretty simple. I've only seen two portions of this that can change. And so the first is that if you're in GCC or in DoD, the .com changes to .gov. And then if you if you are using a dashboard, then instead of this saying report, it would just say dashboard. So those are the only two ways that I've seen it change. But if you do run into any issues with generating this, there is, if you kind of grabbed the JSON out of the pipeline, but you've overwritten it and you're just kind of having trouble with it, you can always go back to the original, what Power Platform had generated when you configured the dashboard object originally, and you can check because it generated that JSON. And so maybe there's a typo or something going on with your embed URL. You can go check what that value is in the environment, because in Power Platform, the value of all of your environment variables are stored in a series of 2 Dataverse tables. And this is going to be useful for troubleshooting here, and then we'll actually use these tables when we get to the Canvas app example. So just a quick video here about how to find and navigate with those tables. So we're in dev environment, going into tables, and you're just going to want to make sure all is selected, and then just start searching for environment variable. And you'll see you've got 2 options. If you want to look for the value, you want to go to the value table. You'll want to go up to the edit so you can customize which columns you're showing. You'll want to make sure that you've got this value column shown, and then also make sure you've got one called environment variable definition. That will give you the name. So I'm going to scroll down at the bottom here. I'm going to find the name, and then I'm going to just grab out. You can see there's our JSON for the dev environment. So at any point you can grab that and just check that against what you're trying to work on in test. And so that's it. I know that seems like it kind of ended pretty quickly, but really once you generate that JSON, you are going to put that, once you've done it for test and you're pushing through pipelines, you'll just drop that in the appropriate section in the pipeline. And then you'll just do the exact same thing for prod, where once you're pushing through the pipeline and it's asking for your environment variable, you're going to just go into the prod workspace, open up that report on Power BI, grab the URL, get those strings out of there the same way. And then once you set all of that up, this now is good to go. You don't have to really do any kind of maintenance or anything different. It's just going to be set up for all your future deployments. But just to show you kind of what that would look like. So now I've got my, here's my model-driven app with my embedded dashboard. So you can see from the URL, we're in the development environment. So it's got this one set of data. If I then open the app now we're in the test, you can see the data has changed because we're now pointing at the test Dataverse table. And then same thing for now we're in production, and the data again is pointing at the data that's in your production environment. So before I go into the Canvas app, are there any questions on the MDA?
Questions from us, Stevie. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Okay, so Power BI tile and Canvas app. This one, it's going to build on what we've done before. So for this one, it is assuming that you've followed all the steps for setting up your Power BI, what we did in the PBIX file in terms of setting up that parameter, and then also that you've set up the parameters in service, so that whole portion has already been set up. We won't go back through it, but if you're kind of jumping in trying to follow along, just know that the step that you do in the PBIX file and in service, those need to be completed first, regardless of whether you're following along for the MDA or for this one for Canvas app. I also talked a little bit about this, but for the Power BI tile and Canvas app, that only accepts a dashboard. It doesn't accept a report type in Power BI service. So you'll see, like, I get around this by because I had my report was a 1-page report, I just pinned the whole thing to a dashboard tile. But just remember, that's a limitation of the Power BI tile control within Canvas apps, is that it has to be a dashboard object. So just a quick video here. This is just how you create the Canvas app and get the Power BI tile added. So we're just coming in here, going up to insert on a blank screen, and I'm searching for Power BI tile. Put that in there, and then you'll see over here you get this nice interface where you can select your workspace, and then this is why it will only pull dashboards, and then you pick your specific tile. So you'll see there's no option to do this for reports, but you just get that all set up. And what this is going to do now is generate a property, which we're going to look at on the next slide, called the tile URL property. And so because this is embedded in here, we're not going to have to mess with any kind of JSON here. We're still going to do the same concept of creating an environment variable but instead of pointing at the report via that JSON, we're actually just going to get different URLs for each of the environment to point at which workspace you want to, or which report and which workspace you want to pull in. So right now we've got this set up for dev. And like I said, you've got this tile URL property on the control. And so for here, it is, this is the information for the version of this report that lives in the dev workspace. Now, this is a little bit different. You can't just go out and grab this URL off of service, like just by opening the report, because it's got some embedding information and a slightly different structure. And so the easiest way that I found to generate this URL is to just go back to, so once you've kind of seen what it is for dev, copy this to your clipboard. You'll also want to grab these values for test and for production, because when we go through the pipeline, this is the information that we're going to feed for the value of the environment variable for each of the stages. And so I grabbed it, copied it for dev, and then I'm just going to go back to the control. I'm going to select my test workspace and connect to that specific dashboard. And then that's going to regenerate the tile URL for that particular dashboard. And then I'll copy that and then do the same thing again. Go over here, switch it to production, grab the URL, and just have that saved for the end of this demo when we're actually going to paste those in as the environment variable values. So you can do that at any point in this process, but at some point before you deploy through the pipeline, you'll want to make sure that you have those three embed URLs copied for each of the stages. So now the next step we're going to need to do is we have to actually have to go in and create the environment variable in our solution ourselves. When we did this for the MDA, the environment variable creation was handled for us as we embedded that dashboard object. But because there's nothing that, there's nothing triggering that, here we just have to create the environment variable ourselves. So again, we're in development, we are in our solution, and we're going to create a new object, go down to more, and environment variable. We're going to give it a display name, which you'll want to just make a note of. And then your data type for this is not JSON. It's going to be text because we're going to be feeding it the URLs. And then again, we see that default and current value concept again. And so this is that tile URL property that I grabbed for the development environment. So defaulting to dev, and then also because right now we're in development, we want to have it be pointing at the Power BI that is in the development workspace. So once you've configured all of this, you can just click save, and now that'll add another environment variable to your solution. And so now that you've got the environment variable created, in order to actually be able to reference these variables in a Canvas app, you need to add those two tables, the environment variable definition and value table that we looked at back with the MDA. Those need to be added as data sources in your app so that we can then reference and look up the values from those tables so we can use the environment variable. So to do that, we are going to go over to the data pane, and we are going to just add those two new tables. So click on add data and then just start searching for environment variable definitions and for values. And then once you get those two tables in there, then you'll be able to reference them in the formula that's going to grab the specific value of that variable for whichever environment you're in. So now you can see we've got those two added to our data pane. And so now last step here is we want to update that tile URL property. Instead of being that hard-coded URL that is generated, we want to make it a reference to the environment variable value. And this is just zooming in on that formula a little bit. Basically, it's just performing a lookup to say, give me the value of the environment variable where the name of the variable is, and then whatever's in between the quotes here. So this is what I named that variable we just created, and it's pulling out the value for me from there. So if you're reusing this code, but you are referencing your own variable, everything is going to stay the same for you. You'll just want to swap out in these double quotes the name of whatever you called your variable. And now that's going to say, okay, whenever you're trying to figure out which dashboard to pull in, just look up at what URL I've fed into this variable for the particular environment, and it's going to create a connection that way. So now we're all set up. Save, publish your Canvas app, and then go into your Power Platform pipeline. And it's the exact same thing as we did for the MDA, where you're going to deploy to your test environment. And then when you hit that stage where it asks for the value of your environment variables, This is why you want to make sure you have those URLs copied from the tile URL property. When we're going to test, we'll just paste the tile URL, the hard-coded value for connecting to test, and then repeat this process exactly the same when you go to production and just paste the production URL. And again, same thing, once this is set up, you don't have to do anything. It requires no maintenance. Every time now that you are deploying through the pipeline, it's going to dynamically be understanding based on where you're at in the environment in Power Platform. It has this logic now all built in there to say, I should pull the Power BI from this workspace. And because we set up the dynamic logic in Power BI, it's going to say, and Power BI is reciprocating and it is pulling from the correct Dataverse environment. So that's it. You got my LinkedIn here if you'd like to connect. And then as promised, here are all the links that I showed in the beginning, but I can also take any questions.
Questions. Thank you so much, Stevie. I'm going to get got a question. Right?
Sorry,
Okay.
I have to ask one.
Yeah.
So it's a question. I know in the past we were able to canvas that, but I don't use Power BI. But in the past we were able to embed report to Canvas. It wouldn't let us do the drop down, but we could apply it the URL, the embedded URL, and then we could manipulate it and work with it that way.
Yeah.
But I also don't know if you were able to then use it in the pipeline the way you're suggesting with environment variables. So I just was wondering if that's not a thing anymore, if Microsoft blocked that or changed anything.
It is still, yeah, I know what you're talking about. It is still a thing where you are manipulating the URL in a different way. You can. I haven't tried it out with the pipeline because I figured that would kind of introduce a little more complexity than I wanted in this type of demo. But as far as I know, they have not blocked the ability, that workaround to get a report in there. I just haven't tested it out with the pipeline. But I mean, in theory, I would assume that if you apply the concepts from the demo and how the environment variable works, you may be able to figure out a workaround and just tweak how the variable, either what the value of the variable is, or potentially kind of change how that's set up. But yes, as far as I know, that workaround is not blocked.
I know I learned a lot. Stevie, that was a wonderful session. A lot of great content. I wrote a lot of stuff down for the post-session recap. I do want to get a photo, if that's okay with everyone. Kind of limited on the camera, so I don't know if everyone wants to, if you guys want to move over on that side. Stevie, do you want to be in the photo too? I was just going to do a screenshot from here.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to right here. I guess it's on this side. Yeah. Oh, let me move the camera. Okay. It doesn't matter. If you guys want to just, yeah. Stevie, do you keep this stuff in here? This bigger.
Oh, I'll put my title slide back up.
That'll be good.
There we go.
You guys just want to do a peace sign or anything? All right, cool. All right, I think that'll do. Cool. Thank you guys for your time. Stevie, thank you so much for your time and your experience and knowledge. That was great. And yeah, if anybody else has questions, I'll follow up with you. But thank you so much for your time and have a good night.
Thank you.
Yes, Stevie.